I mean, they really are all together. But then something happens, and then this often really takes a hit. And there was a time when we thought there was something we could do about that. But it looks like, I'm going to close the door, don't move the thing. But it looks like we aren't as much of an engineer. We're not as much of a social engineer in the lives of our girls as we'd like to be. We can't just say, okay, here's the problem, here's how I'm going to fix it. The advantage that we have with girls is we were girls, and all of the issues in the girl world are also issues in the woman world. So it's not like we don't have a frame of reference for this. One of the real handy tricks in parenting girls is to just make ourselves remember. Okay, now what was I doing when I was 13? What clothes did I want when I was 12? What songs was I listening to? What activities did I want to do? What were my friends saying about each other? And, kind of all of in the moment when we're so upset, is to just try to take ourselves back in time. We talk ourselves into thinking that this is a whole new world, whole new age. Things are so different than they were when we were kids. And it's really fantasy. And we'll talk about that a little bit today. I mean, there is a whole new world. The social media is a whole new world. And it certainly can have more profound and long-lasting implications. But on the other hand, children have always written notes and pasted them up and shared them with everybody that they knew and talked behind other girls' backs. And I mean, nothing's being said on social media that wasn't always being said. And by always, I mean for decades, for the, going back as long as we can look at girl diaries and all those things. So when we tell ourselves how it's so much harder to be a girl, it's so much harder to be a child, it's such a hard time to grow up, we're really missing the point. It's like spinning our wheels, because that's not the issue. The issue is always about what it means to grow up and what's my role as the mother, is that's happening. So we have so much to talk about today. And I've given myself a schedule, but what that really means is it just is going to tell me when to skip ahead. So as I skip things, don't be alarmed. It's just to get to the other good stuff, and somehow it will all get in there. In your handout, the first thing you have, a couple poems. Look at the ages of this is perfect time for every one of you to be here. Because you really are, all of you, kind of right before full-blown adolescence. And you're here and your girls are old enough that you can imagine it coming, so that what I say as we move through the whole spectrum will be very helpful to you in the very near future, if not right now. So I think it's nice that there's kind of the homogeneity of interest here. I've put in a few poems about how it feels to be a girl. And then on page 3, there is this chart. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to jot some notes in the top 2 boxes. Just in the top one. This is my daughter, and what just list descriptors, words you would use to describe her, activities she's interested in, qualities she has that you see acted out at home or with her friends or at school or other places. It's just a verbal picture of your daughter today. And I would put, this is my daughter at age whatever it is. Okay? And if you've got 2 daughters, try to do a few things for both of them. We're going to come back to this page throughout the day. Okay, when you're ready, turn to the next page. And we're going to come back, so as you think of other words to add, you'll have a chance to do that. I'll talk a little bit today about girls I've known and girls in general, and I'll talk about my daughter because it really was the birth of my daughter that gave me the biggest slap in the face of any parenting experience. As many of you know, you've been to other workshops and so you've heard some of my stories, but we had 2 boys and we were old when we started and we were done having children. And then Katie appeared, quite by surprise, and she was a girl. Now, with the boys, I had already experienced that my expectations didn't match the reality. That I really wanted to build boys who would be feminists, who would be sensitive to women and respectful, who would be fair-minded and understand justice and believe that there's an equality between sexes. I thought that things like playing with dolls would help them develop a nurturing side, and I didn't mind them doing boy things, but I just wanted this sort of, I felt like people had just been doing it wrong. And that explained the differences and the different opportunities between boys and girls in the world. And so I had a lot of expectations. The boys weren't particularly cooperative. They were really nice little boys, but they didn't, dolls became guns immediately. I mean, they didn't put them to bed and sing them a song, right? But I thought, okay, well, that being what it is, I'm for sure going to have a girl who isn't warped by the cultural norms for what it means to be female. I'm for sure going to have a girl who is going to grow up active and running around and throwing balls and building buildings and noticing how cars move. And when she gets to physics, she'll have a clue about what motion and force and fulcrum and all these other things are that I didn't seem to understand. And she's just going to be, the modern woman as a little girl growing up. And she just refused. I mean, she could not have been more, she could not have been stronger in her desire to be as feminine and as girly and as different from her brothers as possible. She, if I drug out the blocks, she turned them into babies and wrapped them in a blanket. And I mean, she wouldn't even build anything. If I got the little cars out, she might for a few minutes pretend she was driving to Grandma's house for a tea party, but she didn't really, the cars were insignificant in the play. When we got ready to come to school and I put her in little sweatpants, she would, by the time I got to the car, she'd be in a dress at 3 years old. And when I said to the teachers at conference, what is the deal with this kid? You play on the floor all the time. She's outside. She's got pink sweatpants. And why does she keep putting a dress on? And they just laughed at me and said, well, you wear a dress when you come here. She identifies with you. She wants to be you. She wants to be this is how girls look in her world. She doesn't want to look like those boys. And she knows what boys look like. They're around her all day long. In birth order theory, which is it's probably the most researched thing about family dynamics is birth order. There have been hundreds of years of research about birth order. But in birth order theory, a girl who has 2 brothers who are much older, one of the things that happens is she actually is like an only child or is like the first child, but she also is likely to be either she is likely to be either very, very ultra feminine as a reaction against what the boys are doing, or to be more of a tomboy as I'll be like them kind of reaction, but not much that's sort of normal in between. And that was exactly what happened to Katie. At the time, I was doing lots and lots of studying about child development, and in the 90s, Katie was born in 85, but in the late 80s and early 90s, when MRIs and PET scans became available to researchers for research about learning and thinking and brain research. For the first time, we actually could take a look at brains of babies and children and see how different boy brains and girl brains are. And so all the work that had been done in the 80s, I'm going to talk about, but all the work that had been done in the 80s and on girl psychology didn't quite match the work that was done in the 90s on what the brain looks like and what's happening in the brain. So those of us who were real excited about all the new girl psychology and empowering of women and we can fix this, and we're kind of disappointed to learn that, well, we knew we weren't fixing it, but we were kind of disappointed to learn there was an actual reason why you just couldn't snap your finger and make girls happy, and make girls equal to the men in the culture. Just by snapping your fingers, it was going to be quite a task to change these things because there's a biological and genetic component that we couldn't ignore. Try though people like me did in the house. Try to ignore it if you want to, but they're just going to be who they are. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Here's the truth about what happens in adolescence. Not in the same way for girls as for boys, but this is what adolescence is. Adolescence is a separation from family. It's a period. It's a long period now, but it's a period where everything we have said to our children and everything we've taught them and all of our value system and who we are as people, as a family, all of that has been planted there, and it is there. But now, what your daughter does in adolescence is she decides for herself if that's who she wants to be. If she wants to have your values, if she wants to believe what you said, if she believes it herself deep down. So it wouldn't be that you hadn't been the one saying those things, and it wouldn't even be that your words aren't the most important words in her head, because they always will be. It would be, oh, Christina Aguilera says it too. My best friend's mom says it too. My PE teacher says it too. My hero in the book I just read says it too. It's the two part, the TOO part, that makes it even more important. If she'd never heard it before, then it would be, Christina Aguilera is the only one who understands me. Right? But if she's always heard it, it's just another, it becomes, this is the human experience. Not only do I feel like I'm not beautiful, she felt like she wasn't beautiful too, Christina Aguilera. This famous, rich, hot singer, she felt that way too. She felt that way too enough to write this song, to sing it this way. So I think that's the hardest thing about having a teenage daughter, is not feeling like you have the access to her that you always have. Even when she's right here, because she's not paying attention. She's shoving us away one second and grabbing us the next second and crying on our shoulder. It's just this, it's so hard to be the mother of that when the daughter's been so connected, so tightly. You just feel like you should run away from home yourself. Why be there? Take this abuse anymore. I just had it.
Or boys, that's why we say.
Yeah. I myself in that bathroom. The other thing about the pop star carrying the truth, which this is the truth, these words are what we want, is this. I am old enough to have experienced enough with everybody else's children and with my own to know We don't know where the angel's hiding. We don't know who's going to be there when our child needs somebody else, needs somebody. It is probably, because God has a really great sense of humor, it is probably going to be our enemy. It is probably going to be the one we've been saying, now don't play with him and don't be like her, and that's not the way we dress. And that's probably the person who's going to step forward in that moment when they can't hear us. So it's sad but true that any truth that comes, anything good that builds our daughters up from wherever it comes, is still truth. And here's the other sort of hard thing to know. Our daughters aren't as precious and nice and sweet as we think they are. They are, in some moments, when they're trying out who they are as human beings, they are like the rock star. They are like the mean girl. They are like somebody that we don't want them to be like. There are moments when that's true. So our harsh judgment, which is so easy for us to do, about a certain kind of behavior or dress or person or whatever, then when they feel sort of like that, then it's harsh judgment against them. Does that make sense? I mean, it's not necessarily the experience you have with a 4 to 12-year-old. But believe me, the day comes when helping our daughters be accepting of others helps them to understand that we're accepting of them even in their worst moment. And that's gonna be kind of a theme as we go on here of you know that phrase, let go and let God. The only time that really comes to me is when I'm thinking about real teenage problems, where we aren't going to have the intimate access that we want. We might not even know that there's this problem going on. In fact, if it's a bad problem, the first thing they're going to try to do is keep it from us because they know how disappointed and upset we're going to be. They don't want to disappoint us, right? So that understanding that when we don't have access, their good access may come somewhere, somehow. We hope, we'll pray for that at some given time. Now, what I want to get at, anything else about that you wrote down, I do think, those are, I mean, it's very timely, but it always will be. It would have been when I was 12 too. Okay. Now I want to explain all this experience from sort of the history of research on the psychology of girls, and get to what are the most important topics and themes that we need to know about what motivates girls, what makes girls happy, what's the goal for girls. And I'm going to reference a few other books. One I don't have with me is In a Different Voice by Carol Gilligan. I don't recommend that you read that unless it was a life-changing book for me. It changed the whole world of psychology. But it's very much a technical research kind of reporting book. And then after that, other people wrote better books that were more in the narrative kind of way. But I'm going to tell you why this is so important and what happened, and especially the title. First, when I came to collegiate, I taught high school before, but when I came to collegiate first, I taught 4th, 5th, and 6th grade reading. And then I taught 6th grade for years. And then I moved to 7th and 8th grade. And then I moved back to high school. And things that I thought when I taught 4th, 5th, and 6th graders that I thought were true about kids, then I found out when I had them in 7th and 8th grade and in the high school that I couldn't have been more wrong. You know, that was true about kids when they were 10 or when they were 12 or when they were 13, but it wasn't true about them when they were 17. I mean, there just was this way bigger picture. Carol Gilligan was a psychologist at Harvard University. And her field of study and what she was most interested in was how do children develop their moral life? how do they, at what point do they understand right from wrong? And how do they demonstrate that? And how do they make their decisions on what they do based on their own moral code? And she was very interested in Lawrence Kohlberg's work and in just that whole idea of where does this happen, when does it happen, and are there things we do that makes it happen sooner, more securely, or whatever. So she put together this research study. She lined up schools. She lined up a group of schools, 3 or 4 schools that represented different kinds of demographics. And she had this raft of graduate students, and she sent them out on this research project. And the way they set the project up was they had a series of dilemmas, of moral dilemmas, and they were little stories. And so they would tell children these stories of different ages, and then ask the children, well, what would you do? And after the team was out for the first week, they came back and they said, you know, Carol, girls and boys don't answer these questions the same way. She said, well, that's interesting. Let's figure, why is that? So they went to the Harvard University Library before, the internet, and they got all the books, child development books, psychology books, development of boys. And here's what they found out. There was not one study on the development of girls. There were lots of studies that researched the development, and the subjects were boys. And in fact, in some of the books that were sort of considered to be the Bibles of this kind of thing, there would even be an explanation in the introduction that said, we limited our study to boys because the results were more predictable, or because they were more honest, or because they would actually explain why they'd done it this way. And she said, well, now, just a minute. What we really need to do is study girls. Forget the moral development of children. Let's figure out how girls develop and see if there's a difference between boys and girls, since they're answering these questions differently. So I'll tell you how they answered them differently, because it's absolutely was the kernel of truth that led to everything that we know now from a scientific, research-based way about the development of girls. They can get their own food, their own shelter, their own family. They can take care of themselves. Now, in the day of these studies, that was at about this age. Today, it's this age. Wow. So we now measure adolescence from puberty or age, let's say 12, but sometimes it's earlier, to 28. Very long period of time. Why is that? That's because the more complex a culture, the more things you have to learn and be able to do to be independent as an adult, the longer it will take. So are there some 18-year-olds who are out there on their own making it? Yeah. But not everybody. A lot of people, even after they've completed their education, they're still not there yet. And anyway, I think the age is right, but this is the point. So they had assumed that was the trajectory and the goal for girls too, but turns out that wasn't it at all. Girls didn't want to be independent. And they were willing to, go earn a living and have their own home and all that, but the last thing they wanted to do was break free from their parents. They wanted to be connected. They wanted their trajectory, if you were really evaluating what was going on in their hearts and what they were trying for in everything they did, it was to start at birth, go out here and do all these things and come back and have this connectedness that may indeed include an independent life with another family, but it certainly doesn't go away from the family they have. It's got to include it. In fact, I'm a little afraid if I'm 16 years old, and I mean, I'm happy to say I don't want to listen to you and I want to follow my own rules, but I don't want you to say, get out. I mean, I want to do that with you here hugging me. I don't want to. So. Once they had this idea, and they began to talk to the girls, and they followed them for 30 years. They're actually still following them, but this was in 1980. They learned all kinds of things about girls that were nothing like what we already knew about boys. It turned out that because the brains are different, the biology is different, the culturalization is different, that the experiences through development are different too. And that became a critical thing for us to understand about girls. Because the women's lib movement, for which I have great sympathy and which I think has changed our lives for the better, what it said was, you can be like the boys. You can stand on your own 2 feet. You can follow your passions and dreams. You can realize your potential. You have much to offer the world, including being a mother. But you can be a mother if you want to do some other things too. You can probably do that too. Why not? That came from that movement. But what was kind of the thing that still grates on people, but I'm not going to do that and give up my connectedness, my nurturing, my role in the family. Why would I do that? I don't want to give up the things that are the most important to me as a female, right? So, when Carol Gilligan's stuff came out, wow, this was really interesting. And we spent some years trying to figure out how to fix that before we figured out why would we fix it. It's perfect just the way it is. It's like saying to the turtle, we want you to be the hare. I mean, you can't make it happen, so why would you try to make it happen? But once we sort of embraced this, then we begin to understand all kinds of things about girls and the problems that they have growing up, sort of around the knowledge that came from the study. Now, the title of her book was in a different voice, and it resonated so much. When I read this book, I can remember sitting in the chair when I closed that book thinking, oh my. I've been watching this my whole life and I never saw it. I've told you, these 10-year-old girls, kind of this moment of power. 10's a number, and a lot of women, when they write out kind of their own timeline, 10 will show up. But it might not be 10 for somebody, it might be 11 or whatever. But there's sort of this moment where there's a sense of power that precedes personal power, invigorating kind of moment, that precedes going through puberty. And going through puberty is like crossing a bridge and not being able to get back. Because the new world that you've gone into, the gates are closed now. Now you're a woman. Now there's something else you got to deal with. You can't be this girl again. One of the people who followed Carol Gilligan was Lynn Brown, and then Emily Hancock. And this was the next book that I read, but I'm going to tell you about this in a minute. One of the shocking things that the Gilligan researchers found out was that girls go along until about 10, ahead of the boys, really kind of empowered by their abilities and by the way they see the world and by their way to connect, the way they stay so surrounded and connected. And then after puberty, it's sort of like they crash. And one of the things that evidenced that was the loss of voice. The reason this book was such an experience to me was, as head of middle school, I would see these 5th grade girls come in, and I would think, they were always just great, and all the kids are great, but they were just so They'd come talk to me, and I mean, you just think, oh my gosh, this girl's going to be the president of the United States someday. I mean, let's get her started right now. And by 8th grade, you'd hardly even notice them in the group. And I was, of course, at that moment saying to myself, what are we doing here to these girls, and let's fix it. And we did a lot of fixing because I was pretty interested in what was going on, but even when we fixed it, it didn't fix it. What she would say was, girls who have a strong voice, strong opinions, strong dreams that they can articulate, strong kind of sense of self. And then at the other end, that 7th and 8th grade girl seems shaky, seems not so confident, and definitely seems to have quieted down. So I'm going to classrooms, and I was seeing it every day. You know, I go in 5th grade class, I watch everybody's pretty much the same, boys and girls. They're all kind of doing what everybody else is doing. You get to 8th grade, and the boys are doing all the talking. Unless the teacher says, you must talk, if it's just strictly who wants, and I'm watching this with new eyes, and the boys raise their hand, they don't even have the answer. They just want to be in the game, you know. I'm bored sitting here, so here, call on me for a minute. You know, I'm here. The girls are sitting there writing these incredible notes that the boys are going to copy and take and, you know, and study from. And when the girls get called on and they're sort of pushed into participation, I could hear it. They were saying things like, now, let's say this is the girl with the 100% in the calculus class. This is in high school too. And the teacher calls on her, and she's got the answer. You can sit there and see it. She's done the work. And the teacher says, you know, Yolanda, what do you think about number 10? And I kid you not, here's what they say, over and over and over. Well, I'm not sure, but maybe, it might be, I think, I got, is it right? I mean, it was kind of this kind of, unsure. It's not that they don't know it's right, it's that they don't want to project to these, whatever, the boys or girls, this sort of cockiness of, well, of course it's right. I understand it, I did it, here it is, look at it. And if you say to them, and let's use the example of the girls in calculus, if you say to them, you know, what are you going to do next year in college? I mean, you're such a strong science and math student. You know, what are you going to do? And what the girl will say over and over, fills these books, and it's happened, it was so true, is, well, I'm not really good at it. I work hard, right? You know, I hang in there, you know, I did it, but I'm good at it? No, I'm not really good at it. The loss of voice that Carol Gill, the label for this phenomenon is so appropriate because it is a loss of voice. It's a loss of voice, but then the question became is it because they want to appear pretty to the boys and not smart? Is it because the other girls will talk about them if they act like they know too much and they're too, you know, all that? Is it just their own sense of humility that they don't want to throw themselves out there because then they might not stay connected if they push the boundary too much in some way? I mean, what is that? We wondered and we thought about and we changed things around and we worked on. But then we realized the question is really more than is this a loss of voice? The question is this a loss of self? That's even more important to wonder about as we watched this progression